Hey there, hello and welcome to the Exaltify Me podcast. I'm your host, Nenad Leonart, and today we're going to learn about going into coping mechanisms. What are the things that you do, that I do, that kind of society does as a whole, and we all pretend it's okay, we all pretend like that's really, really fine, and it's normal, and you're weird if you don't do it. But that is actually hurting you and your personal development to such a degree that you kind of get stuck. You're chasing circles, you are just not doing what you're supposed to do. And so many people, when they are in self-development, they kind of get to this point and they're like, well, what now? Where are we going to go from here? And there's no going from there because everybody has like the same blind spots. And everybody is pretending that they know what they're doing. Okay, before we dive into that, I want to talk to you about something that I did today, which was I did a teaching for AI. So I do coach musicians. I help them to further their careers, to go into advancement, to learn about marketing, to learn about how to be more efficient, how to get more concerts, how to get more money, how to just exceed their own expectations on a personal and professional level. And today the theme was AI. So many of them were kind of asking me about it because they kind of were interested in learning about AI, but they also at the same time were kind of very wary, right? I have never looked at it. I don't know what it is. It's like this modern thing. And I mean, the guys that were there, they were like great and interested, but still, if you think of it, as I'm recording this, it's beginning of 2025, this thing has been around for well over 2 years. And there's people that have maybe just scratched the surface of what's going on with AI. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think that our world is fundamentally going to change. And it is going to change because of AI, obviously, but it's not going to just change the way that we work. It's not going to redistribute the power across the world. I'm not talking about these developments, which are obviously all going to happen. I'm talking more on a level of personal development. I'm talking about the level of self-connection, and I'm also talking about a level of focus redistribution inside of ourselves and our next things around us. Okay, why am I saying this? Because AI needs us to think in a different way. AI needs for us to be able to talk to it, to prompt it, and so on, for us to be operating on a different kind of level. Now, this might sound very, very boring to you, and it kind of is if you don't understand the implications of this. When we start practicing thinking in this new way that AI requires of us, and I will tell you just in a second what kind of way that is, if we don't really understand that, there is no way that we don't start thinking like this in other areas of our lives too. That is inevitably something that is going to happen. And here is what it is. AI enables us to spend more and more time to create executive decisions like a manager or a CEO would do, and distribute work. And it's going to make us spend less and less time doing like the actual operative work. So the mundane tasks, the day-to-day stuff, the repetitiveness, that's going to be less and less. And it's going to be more and more of taking decisions that are going to put us in a certain direction. So if you want to talk to AI, that's basically what they told him today. You need to learn a new language. You need to understand like all the aspects that are needed for this language. And by the way, these aspects are also existent already in our human interactions. Just oftentimes we are not aware of those, or we haven't really ever looked at these with this kind of precision, but they are very important. And now when you work with AI, it forces you to start thinking like that, like in these aspects, and it also starts to force you to think with a lot more intention. Now, the clearer your intention is with AI, the better your result is going to be. Like, the better you prompt, the better you know what you want, the better the output is going to be. That's just like a rule. And looking at it from a perspective of personal development, looking at it from a perspective of IOPT, of different parts theory, there are very, very important parts inside of us that are around our will, that are around our self-identity, that are going to be focused on more and more and more and more in the future to come. Because these are the actual psychological functions that we have inside of us that are deciding what we want to do with our life, where we want to go, how we want to do it, like what we want to experience. You know, all these things, they're being kind of decided. In IOPT, that would be the I, like the subject, and the will, the wants, the desires, the intention of the person, so to speak. So you have these two aspects, and they are really, really being over-focused when you start working with AI. Now, I'm saying over-focused because it's over-focused in comparison to what we have been doing earlier, right? Earlier, somebody comes and they, let's say you work in a factory, they tell you what your task is, and you just do the same repetitive thing over and over again. Or whatever your, maybe when it was knowledge work, when you were working with information, you get like a specific goal, and you have different tools that you need to use to achieve those goals. Now with AI, it starts getting different. With AI, it's you who is supposed to be setting the goals. And it's you who is supposed to be finding out which direction to go, what are the circumstances, who is it for, who is it not for, and you get to decide all these like tiny little details so you can make it very specific, at least with generative intelligence, generative AI, so that you can actually go in that direction. And I think this is wonderful because this is one of the few tools that exist out there that are actually putting the focus back on ourselves. It's pulling the focus back on what we want and who we are. And it's giving us direct feedback, like if we are unclear with what we want, right? If there is not enough clarity, if the intention isn't strong enough, it's just going to be like, okay, well, your result is kind of meh. And if you really work on your intention, and if you're able to articulate and to like really find out all these little details, and to do so, you need to go in connection with yourself, then you really get good results. So I think with the help of AI, we are going to develop into more evolved human beings. Not just because it's taking care of a huge load of work for us, but also because of what kind of work we are going to be doing in the future, which is going to be much more identity and will-oriented, and it's going to come out of more deep states out of us. Okay, here's a last parable, just because of this AI thing, because of I've put myself really in there, and I think it's a super interesting field, and if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend doing so. One of these kind of anecdotes that I've heard is the genius of Isaac Newton that kind of put the prism before the ray of light. Like everybody before him did that already. Like they knew, okay, when you put the prism in front of light, it's going to, you're going to get a rainbow. You're going to get like the different elements of light. It's going to separate them and make them visible to you. But then Isaac Newton said, well, when I put another prism at the end of the rainbow, then I'm supposed to get light, right? Like I can take all these different parts that it's been separated into, and then I would be getting the result how it was before. And it actually works. That's how prism works. Like you can break off light into its different parts, and then they kind of all fuse together after in a prism. And this is also some kind of thinking that we are going to be evolving more and more in the future through AI, because it needs like these different layers of communication. It needs these different parts from us to know, okay, what's the surroundings, what's the setting, who is this for, what is my role, what is your role, what do you want to know, and so on. Like all these different parts of communication that oftentimes we as humans don't even think about. We just assume certain things. When you meet somebody, you just assume. You don't really ask them, you don't really go into communication, and we just kind of pay attention into all these small deflections in the voice and what the people are saying, but we don't really ask for the information. So we do get a lot of information, but the rest we fill up with our imagination. And I love that there was, by Stephen Covey, there's like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a really cool book to read. I recommend this one as well if you haven't read it. It's wisdom for everyday life. It's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's kind of like the Bible of everybody who wants to achieve things and not get stuck in a rut or whatever. And I remember one of the lessons that he brings in there was seek first to understand and then to be understood. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. So usually in our communications with people, we never really go and listen and try to understand their perspective and try to figure out like what are they thinking about or what are they feeling or what's the context. And he describes this sad story actually where I went like, oh, where it's a guy in the subway and he's also going in the subway and there's like these 2 children that are just wreaking havoc and they are running around and very noisy, and then he snaps at the father and he's like, have you no manners? Like, why are you not teaching your children to behave in the subway? It's like not their playground. Like there's people here. And the father is like completely lost in thoughts, and then he kind of says, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't even notice that they were like running around. Their mom just died in the hospital and I still have no idea how to tell them. Now, can you imagine how this guy felt? How both of them felt actually, like the one telling this to the father and the father in his situation. And this is a situation, like a description of a situation that is a little bit extreme, but it comes so often in our lives that we are just thrown into some context and then we assume, right? We assume without really asking, without really connecting. And then we say, well, this people's just, they're unbearable, right? Or this person is an asshole, or I'm not gonna talk to them, you know, like they're mean. That's happening a lot. And I really took this to heart, what Stephen Covey was saying there, and I really tried to now always understand the context and also understand that I don't know. I don't know what this person is going through. I don't know what they have been through. And even if they are like disregarding my personal space or my personal needs, it often helps me to not react directly with anger, but more with compassion and more from a stance of, well, I don't know exactly what they are going through, and it could be like horrible, you know? So let me just ask, see where they are, and also maybe kindly let them know that they're overstepping the boundary, they're in my personal space, or that they haven't been paying attention to something that's kind of normal, you know, like normal human decency. And since I've started doing that, again, like I'm not perfect in implementing it, but like my level of, let's say, daily rage has almost disappeared. And now I even find it almost funny sometimes. In Switzerland, a lot of people are using the public transport, and you get these trains and subways. And so people would be rushing in and rushing out, and they kind of never look back. They don't even let people get off. And I used to be getting really angry at these people earlier. Like, why on earth, like, they aren't even paying attention to others, and they're being mean, and so on. And now I always kind of smile, and I feel like a little bit of compassion, because they don't know better, because they're like so closed off in their own world. They're probably really stressed about the work that they have to do, that they are not even noticing the smallest, tiniest, normal things around them. That's just a perspective shift going inside that is kind of changing the reaction of like the same situation. And that's kind of a little life lesson just right there, how we look at things, like how you look at things, what filter you're using, what story you're telling yourself to what is happening, that is going to affect how you feel about it. That is going to affect your emotions and everything going on around them. And now let's get to our actual theme today, which is the coping mechanisms. Like, I specifically took these, and we are just going to try to understand, like, what's the mechanism behind this. Coping means like trying to deal with something, finding a way to deal with it so that I can live with it, so that I can cope, right? It's not an ideal situation. It's not how I wished it to be, but like coping is, okay, I'm trying to make it work. And there's some sort of compromise. There's some sort of, there's friction in coping. Now, why are we doing that? Well, if you have been listening to this podcast, you probably have an idea. I'll tell you now nonetheless. It's about trauma that we carry inside of us. Like the trauma that we have from bad things happening to us. Most of it is from our childhood that we just don't remember, that we were kind of powerless, that we were maybe feeling overlooked, not really cared for, maybe even forgotten sometimes, misunderstood, and so on. So these kind of pile on. You know, kids are really mean to each other because they're just like testing out also social boundaries, how social interactions work, and so on. So this goes on top of that. We have childhood trauma from our schools, from our parents, from being a baby, from being born, from all different things, right? Going to the doctor and so on. And then later, when we're grown up, we don't really want to remember these, so we just kind of stuff them down, and they're out of our awareness. And the not so ideal thing is that they are still running the show, okay? So coping mechanisms would sort of be the mechanisms that are keeping this trauma in check. So let's say we stuff it all down. That needs a lot of energy. And again, like our psyche is not perfect. All these mechanisms are not perfect. So when you stuff something down long enough, you are like your muscles are starting to get sore. So maybe you cannot be pressing at the same power that you would wish all the time, right? And so sometimes in moments of weaknesses, let's say something comes up, or something really, really reminds us of this trauma, like we get triggered because we're in a certain situation, and then kind of the lid explodes and all this energy comes up and like a crazy thing goes down, right? Basically what happens when we are triggered is some emotion takes over and we get to have a very strong emotional reaction that is not appropriate to the situation, right? Somebody asking you something and you go like, what the F? You know, like just really, really loud. And this was not corresponding to the situation, which was probably maybe even very calm, or maybe had a good intention, or whatever. So that's getting triggered. We have trauma inside. We need the coping mechanism to live with all that trauma that we have stuffed down. We needed to make our life kind of still worth living. We also needed to not be constantly reminded of this shit, because obviously when something is always coming up when it's flying up, well, it is kind of a good reminder that something's wrong, right? And when you know that something's wrong, you kind of want to go and find out what it is and fix it. But our psyche does not want us to find out, right? There's a part of us that just want to keep it really, really quiet. And if it's kind of quiet and nothing going on, then it's kind of happy because it's protecting us from what's down there, right? But we are still suffering, we're still in pain, and so on. So the coping mechanisms are kind of distractions, usually from what's really going on. Coping mechanisms go into many different things, like usually they are the reason why somebody goes into addictions. And this can be very many different forms of addictions. It can be like substance abuse, it can be addiction to sex, it can be addiction to video games, it can be addiction to social media, to contact, and something, or it can be addiction to food. All of these things have the same thing in common. Like, you can tell that I've been putting a lot of energy to find out what this is and how it works. Basically, all of these have a very natural way of rewarding our system, which is the dopamine. Whenever we do something out of these things that are kind of compensating us for the lack of something that we have inside, something that is a coping mechanism, something that's distracting us from what's down there, it's usually something that is connected to dopamine. Now, dopamine is a very, very evolutionary hormone. It's used in our body to make us, well, it's kind of training us, right? Our whole body-mind system to do the things that we need to do in order to survive. Right? Dopamine is used for sexual reproduction, dopamine is used for getting food, dopamine is used for reinforcing behaviors that are good. Like, it's the reward that we get from doing an action that's actually cool. And it is also a huge motivator for us. However, what we have today is like just an overkill of dopamine. So many people just living in a state where we have so much dopamine flying around, it's not normal. It's not normal. Like, they know that whenever a notification comes on the phone, there's a small spike of dopamine that we get. Same goes for eating. Like, when we get hunger, the dopamine level rise, so we want to go out and eat something. When we eat something sweet, or let's go into substance abuse, when you are excessively drinking, or when you're drinking at all, or when you're having a cigarette, like, this is directly working on your dopamine levels. Same goes with coffee, right? Same goes with getting an email. Same goes with like a lot of these things that are quote unquote normal for us. Some are more accepted by the society, some are less accepted. But whatever it is, like everything that's going on, it's really, really just chemical reactions in our body. And my point that I'm trying to make is these chemical reactions can be very, very distracting from the issues at hand. Now, oftentimes, the coping mechanism kind of forces us to run into these dopamine spikes so hard that we get into a burnout. Now, what does this mean? It means that we don't have unlimited supply of this hormone. It's like with all substances that you've heard, I do compare it to a drug because it is a chemical reaction in our body, and oftentimes drugs would do that too. So you have the first reaction, it's really, really, really great. You would have a drug for one time, but then when you take it, let's say another time, it's just not as great. So people that fall into drug addictions, they would have to heighten the dose. So the dose needs to be stronger and stronger each time because the sensitivity of the body is just becoming less and less and less. And you have this drop of the, let's say, regular levels. So it feels like a lack. And you need to fill this void, like this drop. And the reality of the situation is that kind of most people running around, they are permanently in this drop. Because the whole world that we live in is structured to make us fall into this drop. So we are usually way low in the dopamine levels that we actually should be. Way low, much too low. And also, so many people are much nearer to the state of burnout than they could be, should be, naturally. Because we are just overstimulated. Again, this is all coping mechanisms. Now, you can say, well, this is because everybody is traumatized, so everybody kind of needs this to happen. So we are not really taking care of ourselves. Or you can also say, well, this is happening, because corporations, they want to make money, and so they kind of do this, so you lose touch with yourself and you buy more of their stuff. Or you could maybe say, well, it's just like a normal development, right? With our technology, with everything that we had no idea that this is going to happen, that we're going to be using up more and more and more dopamine spikes, and then we're kind of lacking the regulation of it. Be that as it may, it could be all three reasons, could be only one. I can tell you right now that it's really, really working good as a coping mechanism, in that is distracting you from your essence as a human being. And many people, when I tell them this, they realize, almost everybody, I've never met a person that hasn't realized it in this moment. Oh yeah, that's true. This really rings true to me, that all this behavior, running around, trying to catch the reward, trying to catch the dopamine spike, that is actually distracting me from the essence of life itself, from the essence of me being me. Because it's the opposite of existing. Existence is just kind of this enjoying of being, of what is. While the running around, trying to get something better or get that next reward, that next spike, that's just a never-ending cycle. So where are you at right now in your life? This is my question to you. Where do you find yourself? Have you been able to regulate this more? Maybe also even on a subconscious level, or are you more lost in this? Do you get up in the morning and first thing you do is check your phone? Do you get all these stimuli from looking at the news, from looking at your notifications? Like, what's going on there? That's what I want you to find out, like, for yourself. Is it the worst it's ever been, or are you maybe already regulating in a little way better than before? Well, this is the overall general mechanism of what's going on, but we have many more kind of sub-displays of the coping mechanisms that sometimes disguises itself even as healthy habits. It sometimes even disguises itself as, well, this is actually a good thing to do, and yet people are abusing it to run away from themselves. Well, one very, very good example of this would be politics. Okay, people who go into politics or who are actually interested in politics, and I already feel so many going like, but politics are so important, you know? This is just how it is. The reality of the situation is, like, people in politics usually use politics to not focus on themselves, but to kind of externalize their inner problems. And so they can project it onto others, and so they can blame others for these. And then they get into this reenactment of their traumas, but just like with different figures. It's the same game of chess, but you kind of just change the board. And you don't play it inside of yourself, you just play it externally. And there's very many like sub-aspects of politics, but also like of similar behavior, like behavior that is kind of trying to create justice, behavior that is kind of trying to put people in their place, behavior that is kind of controlling. So you would go into maybe even feelings of revenge, you know, or just like put somebody like to justice, give them what they deserve. You know, that's kind of even creating more of these weird situations where it kind of gets to be this vortex of coping mechanisms where more and more people can be sucked in, right? But also things like rebellion. Rebellion could be against one's own parents, it could be against the government, it could be against the boss, it could be against like certain sets of rules, and so on. So like when this goes on, rebellion, it's really, really something that is a coping mechanism, basically. It's, again, trying to distract from inner trauma and externalizing it and making other people to be the bad ones. Same goes for revolution, right? Revolution is like a violent change of circumstances, of government, of the political elite, everything that has kind of to do with revolution. It's marginalizing trauma usually, and it's doing more harm than good. A very interesting point, it's going to be the next one that's a lot of people get triggered by this one. It's going into pathology and trying to medicate. Okay, so making out sicknesses, making out illnesses, both like medical, but also psychological, and then also trying to medicate those. These are coping mechanisms. And the ones that have been to psychotherapy and say that it hasn't worked, or like that the medication that they received hasn't worked, they know about this dynamic. Because usually, like how our whole medicinal system works is we don't really take care of ourselves. We don't make ourselves healthy first, So we don't fall ill in the first place, but we wait until something happens, until we get some sicknesses, and then we run to the doctor. So the doctors aren't really health professionals, they're sickness professionals. So you go to the doctor when it's already too late. And then the doctor is just looking at your symptoms, and you're getting medication for your symptoms. They're not going to go to the source inside of your life and fix that and say, well, you have this and this and this because this and this and this and this and this. Usually it's like, okay, this needs to get fixed. So here's your medication. This is your treatment. It's going to take a little bit of time and then it's going to be fine. So most medication is on the symptoms based. Again, it's a coping mechanism. It's just fixing the stuff that appears to be wrong, but it doesn't look at the underlying issue. It's not fixing it. And so the whole industry of medicine, obviously also with the pharma industry and everybody around it, they're not really interested in actually fixing the issues at hand. They are interested in making the most of the money, and the easiest way to do so is just like fix the symptoms so people feel okay, but they will eventually come back. Then we kind of talked about this in the last episode. It's religions. Yeah, sorry for you folks out there. But kind of every religion, if you follow that one meticulously and find yourself to be inside of that system, it is a coping mechanism. Like it displays all parts of a coping mechanism. It is not looking at the underlying issue that people have, but it's kind of taking the symptoms, creating a power structure around these symptoms so people kind of become trapped in these communities, in these power structures, and then it's giving them what they want and need on a regular basis so the people stick around. But it's not offering a permanent solution. And it's usually based not on truths, but on illusions. Now, nothing against religions. Again, we all do our coping mechanism. It would be just good for you to know that that's something that from the standpoint of inner work is considered a coping mechanism. If you do get triggered about this, maybe that's a good question to ask yourself, what exactly is being triggered? Same goes for spirituality. So there's a lot of illusions of harmony and the dissolvement of the I, of the self into like higher grounds, higher constructs. And that is also like a coping mechanism because certain things are just not able to be looked at or to be lived with. Same goes for arts. Like the whole arts world, the creation of sculptures, of paintings, of drawings, of music, the whole theater, whole acting, poetry, writing, all of these things. I've probably forgotten many arts, like that's just what came to mind. All of these things are regarded as an enrichment of life. They are regarded as an expression of being human. And yet, oftentimes, they're just kind of calls for help of traumatized parts in ourselves, and they are kind of redistributed, like they're transmuted into art so other people enjoy it. But usually, like, there's the saying that the real artists do it because they need it, right? That's the reason why. That's the reason why. Like, it's a coping mechanism because there's no other way to deal with the situation. But then there's also forgiveness. Forgiveness in situation is oftentimes used to create like a illusion of harmony and illusion of letting go. So I will forgive you for certain things that you have done so we can get back into like an earlier relationship that we had, right? And we are just going to try to ignore everything that happened. And that's also why it's so hard for many people to forgive, because they have to do that over and over and over again, and becomes like a central theme. And it's almost like a cancer that eats away, you know? Like, so forgiveness, also coping mechanism. And, well, the only way out, the only way to save yourself out of all these dealings that we have created as human beings, I mean, look at our society today. That's all the things we do. All the things we do as normal human beings, it's just coping with the bad things that happen to us. It might not seem like this to you, but once you start doing the actual deep inner work, the trauma work, you come out and you kind of stop being blind and you see all this happening and you go like, okay, this is what's going on. And it's going on for everybody in this world. The only way to get out of it is to start working at your own trauma. To really go deep, to get professional help, basically, and start looking at these things one after the other. That's what you want to do. And this way, it's not just that you stop using these coping mechanisms, but you actually get the free will. You can decide. I mean, you can still watch TV, you can still hang out with your friends, you can still be, I don't know, scrolling TikTok or writing messages or checking your emails or having the occasional glass of wine. Like, whatever you want to do, you can still do, but you have much more free will and you're not feeling pulled from an invisible force to do these things. You don't feel really compelled to do stuff that's not really useful to you just because you're kind of addicted to certain sorts of behaviors. And that's what it's about. It's about giving you freedom to decide in your own life. It's about strengthening your free will. The parts that we talked about in the beginning that are going to be more and more focused or in focus with the AI revolution, like your sense of I and your sense of will, that is going to be more and more important in the future, and not just for work, but also for your personal development. So the earlier you start to reconnect with those, the better for you. And believe me, they have been wanting to reconnect with you for a long time as well. So first step, how to do that is I would highly encourage you to go and do like an IOPT session to have a self-encounter. We are also doing these online, so just hit me up, write me a message, or I guess you will find the right sources. And that's a great way to start reconnecting with yourself. I mean, before I was doing these, it was kind of playing with really my self-development and my personal development. It's nothing compared to being confronted with actual facts, be in a dialogue with myself, and to actually get to meet me, to meet myself. And I gotta say, I'm more in love with myself every single day. It's a really nice way to start practicing self-love, to start learning about true self-love and how it works, and basically just stopping to have these bad habits and things kind of happening to me. Well, now I feel much more that I'm at the cause of what I choose to do. and when I choose to do it and how I choose to do it. So this is to you. If you want that as well, hit me up, to write me a message, to write me an email, and we'll make it happen. We have regular groups that we are meeting online, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, we will make this happen. Having said that, take care, and I will see you in the next episode. This is the Exaltify Me podcast, and I'm your host, Nenad Leonart. Have a great week. Till the next time.